The city was alive that night, buzzing with energy as people moved through its streets. Cars honked, music played faintly from nearby clubs, and neon signs lit up corners where shadows lingered. It seemed like any other evening until something happened that would change everything, for everyone involved. Nathan Harris sat behind the wheel of his sleek black sedan, driving home after a long day at work. He had spent hours in courtrooms, listening to arguments and making decisions that could alter lives forever. As the Chief Justice, he carried a heavy responsibility, but it was a role he cherished because it gave him the chance to make things better for those who needed help most. Tonight, though, all he wanted was to get back to his family, to Angela, who always greeted him with warmth, and Marcus, their teenage son whose laughter filled the house with joy. As he turned onto Maple Street, Nathan noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe someone else had been pulled over nearby. But then the lights grew brighter, closer, until they were right behind him. Confused, Nathan glanced at his speedometer. He hadn't been going too fast, and checked his mirrors again. Sure enough, the police car was signaling for him to pull over. He complied immediately, steering his vehicle smoothly into a parking spot along the curb. His heart beat a little faster than usual, but he told himself there was no reason to worry. Maybe it was just a routine check, or perhaps they had mistaken him for someone else. After all, this kind of thing didn't happen often. Not to him, not in this neighborhood. When the officers stepped out of their cruiser, Nathan rolled down his window and waited patiently. One was a tall man with broad shoulders and sharp features. His name tag read Officer Miller. Beside him stood a woman with short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. Officer Dawson, according to her badge. Both wore expressions that made Nathan uneasy. They weren't friendly or curious. They looked angry, almost hostile. "License and registration, please," Officer Miller demanded, leaning down to peer into the car. His tone was clipped, leaving no room for small talk. Nathan nodded politely. "Of course," he said, reaching carefully into his jacket pocket for his wallet. He handed over his driver's license before retrieving the registration papers from the glove compartment. All the while, he kept his movements slow and deliberate, knowing how easily misunderstandings could escalate. But instead of examining the documents, Officer Miller frowned and took a step back. "You know why we stopped you?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Nathan shook his head. "No, sir, I don't." "Did I do something wrong?" Officer Dawson chimed in, shining her flashlight directly into his face. "This car matches the description of a stolen vehicle reported earlier tonight." Nathan blinked against the bright light, trying to stay calm. "I assure you, this is my car. I've owned it for years." He gestured toward the documents, still clutched in Officer Miller's hand. "You can verify that information if you'd like." For a moment, neither officer responded. Then Miller leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. To Nathan, it sounded less like a promise and more like a threat. Things escalated quickly after that. Despite Nathan's cooperation, the officers refused to listen. When he reminded them of his position as Chief Justice, hoping it might lend credibility to his claims, they only grew more dismissive. "Don't try to pull rank on us," Dawson snapped, her voice laced with disdain. "We're just doing our job." Nathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't right. He knew the law inside and out. He had dedicated his life to upholding it. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. Every instinct told him to argue, to demand respect, but experience had taught him that such actions rarely ended well. So he stayed quiet, praying the situation would resolve itself peacefully. It didn't. Before he realized what was happening, Officer Miller grabbed his arm roughly and yanked him out of the car. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around his wrists, cutting into his skin. Pedestrians passing by stopped to stare, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Voices murmured in disbelief. "Isn't that Judge Harris? What's going on here?" Nathan tried to maintain his composure, even as humiliation burned in his chest. He locked eyes with Officer Dawson, searching for a shred of humanity. Please, he said softly. You're making a mistake. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on securing the handcuffs tighter. Save it for the station, she replied coldly. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Someone shouted, Leave! Him alone, he hasn't done anything. Another voice joined in louder this time, Let him go, but the officers ignored them, shoving Nathan into the back seat of their cruiser without another word. As the car sped away, Nathan stared out the window, watching the city blur past. His mind raced with questions. How had it come to this? What would Angela think when she heard? And what message did this send to Marcus, who already faced so many challenges growing up as a young black man in America? Back at the scene, the crowd remained, buzzing with outrage. Videos of the arrest spread across social media within minutes, igniting a firestorm of debate. Some condemned the officers' actions, calling them racist and unjustified. Others defended them, claiming they were following protocol. By morning, the incident would dominate headlines nationwide, sparking protests and calls for accountability. For Nathan, however, none of that mattered yet. Right now, he was alone in the back of a police car, stripped of his dignity and power. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to feel powerless. And it terrified him. Still, deep down, a spark of defiance flickered. He knew this wasn't the end. Whatever came next, he vowed to fight. Not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been treated this way. Because if justice couldn't be found in the system he served, then what hope was there for anyone? The video of Nathan Harris's arrest spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, it was everywhere, on news websites, social media platforms, and even late-night talk shows. People watched in disbelief as the Chief Justice, a man known for his fairness and dedication to justice, was treated like a common criminal. The footage showed everything: the flashing police lights, the aggressive tone of the officers, the way they ignored Nathan's calm explanations, and finally, the moment he was shoved into the back of the police car. To many viewers, it wasn't just an arrest. It was proof that something was deeply wrong with the system. By morning, protests erupted across the city. Groups of people gathered outside the police station where Nathan was being held, demanding answers. Signs read, "Justice for Nathan Harris," and "Enough is enough." Others chanted slogans like, "No justice, no peace." Their voices echoed through the streets, drawing attention from passers-by who joined in or stopped to listen. Some brought megaphones, amplifying their calls for accountability. Others simply stood silently, holding candles or pictures of Nathan. Angela Harris woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike, all expressing outrage over what had happened. She scrolled through the notifications, her hands trembling as she saw the video everyone was talking about. Watching it felt surreal, almost dreamlike. How could this be real? Her husband, a respected judge, a loving father, a pillar of their community, was now sitting in a jail cell because two officers chose not to believe him. She tried calling Nathan, but the number went straight to voicemail. Panic bubbled inside her chest. What if something worse happened? What if they didn't treat him properly? Angela knew all too well how quickly situations like these could spiral out of control. She thought about Marcus, their teenage son, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing outside. For now, she decided to shield him from the truth, at least until she figured out what to do next. After taking a deep breath, Angela dialed Rachel Monroe, Nathan's lawyer. Rachel answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and urgent. "I've already seen the video," she said before Angela could explain. "Don't worry, I'm working on getting him released, but this isn't going to be easy." "What do you mean?" Angela asked, clutching the phone tightly. "The police aren't budging," Rachel replied. "They're sticking to their story about the stolen car even though it's clearly bogus, and since he's technically under arrest, we'll need to go through the proper channels to get him out." Angela sighed heavily. "How long will that take?" A few hours, maybe longer, Rachel admitted. But I promise you, I won't stop until he's home. While Angela waited anxiously for updates, the protests grew larger and more intense. Social media played a huge role in spreading awareness. Activists shared posts urging people to join demonstrations, while hashtags, like #FreeNathanHarris, trended nationwide. Journalists flocked to the scene, interviewing protesters and capturing footage of the growing unrest. One young woman held up a sign that read, "If they can arrest a judge, what chance do the rest of us have?" Her words resonated with countless, others sparking debates online and offline. Not everyone supported the protests, though. Critics argued that the officers were justified in stopping Nathan, pointing out that mistakes happen. Some claimed the entire situation was blown out of proportion, accusing protesters of using race as an excuse to stir up trouble. These comments fueled heated discussions, dividing communities further. Even local politicians weighed in, each trying to position themselves on the right side of public opinion without actually addressing the root cause of the issue. At the police station, Nathan sat alone in a cold, dimly lit cell. The handcuffs had been removed, but the humiliation lingered. He replayed the events of the previous night over and over in his mind, searching for answers. Had he done something wrong? Could he have handled things differently? No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that none of this would have happened if he'd been white. As the hours dragged on, Nathan reflected on his career. He had spent decades fighting for equality, advocating for those who lacked a voice. Yet here he was, locked away like a criminal, stripped of his authority and dignity. It was a bitter irony, one that left him questioning whether any of his efforts had truly made a difference. Eventually, Rachel arrived at the station, accompanied by a team of assistants. She marched straight to the front desk, demanding to see Nathan immediately. After some resistance, the officers relented, allowing her access to the holding area. When she finally reached him, Nathan looked both relieved and defeated. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly as she approached. "This shouldn't have happened." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to fix this," she assured him. "But first, we need to focus on getting you out of here." With Rachel's help, Nathan was released later that afternoon. As he stepped outside, he was greeted by a sea of supporters cheering his name. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for news outlets around the world. For a brief second, Nathan allowed himself to feel grateful. These people cared enough to stand up for him, to demand justice when the system failed. But the victory was short-lived. Back at home, Angela hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Marcus, who had woken up to find his father missing, ran to embrace him. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Nathan replied, forcing a smile. "But we need to talk about what happened." That evening, the family sat together in the living room, discussing their next steps. Angela urged Nathan to speak out publicly, to use his platform to highlight the injustices faced by so many others. Marcus agreed, suggesting they organize a march or rally to keep the momentum going. Nathan listened carefully, weighing their suggestions against his own doubts and fears. Deep down, he knew they were right. If he stayed silent, the incident would fade from memory, buried beneath newer headlines. But if he spoke up, if he used his experience to shine a light on systemic racism, perhaps something good could come from all of this pain. The following day, Nathan addressed the nation in a televised interview. Sitting beside Angela and Marcus, he recounted the events of his arrest, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "What happened to me isn't unique," he explained. "It happens every day to countless individuals who don't have the privilege of being heard. We cannot allow this to continue." His words struck a chord with millions of viewers. Donations poured into civil rights organizations, and volunteers signed up to support grassroots movements. The protests intensified, with marches taking place in cities across the country. People from all walks of life joined forces, united by a shared desire for change. Meanwhile, Officers Miller and Dawson faced mounting scrutiny. Calls for their suspension, or even termination, grew louder, prompting internal investigations within the police department. Though they remained on duty for now, their actions were under constant review. For Nathan and his family, life became a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and strategy sessions. Every decision they made carried weight, knowing that eyes were on them, not just locally but globally. Despite the pressure, they refused to back down. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. It was about creating a future where no one else had to endure what he did. As days turned into weeks, the movement gained traction. Politicians began drafting legislation aimed at reforming policing practices, while schools incorporated discussions about racial bias into their curriculums. Slowly but surely, progress was being made, yet Nathan knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Change rarely came easily, especially when it challenged deeply ingrained beliefs and systems. Still, he clung to hope that someday justice might truly prevail for everyone regardless of the color of their skin. The trial began on a cold Monday morning, drawing crowds that spilled out onto the courthouse steps. Reporters jostled for position, microphones in hand, eager to capture every detail of what many were calling the case of the decade. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with nervous energy. Supporters of Nathan Harris filled one side of the gallery, clutching signs and wearing buttons that read, "Justice for all." On the other side sat those who backed Officers Miller and Dawson, convinced they were being unfairly targeted. The divide between the two groups was palpable, a reflection of the larger societal rift the case had exposed. Nathan walked into the room flanked by his lawyer, Rachel Monroe, and his wife, Angela. Despite everything he'd been through, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His suit was neatly pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, but there was no hiding the exhaustion in his eyes. For weeks, he'd endured sleepless nights, reliving the humiliation of his arrest and worrying about what the outcome might mean, not just for him, but for countless others watching closely. As the proceedings got underway, the prosecution laid out its case. They argued that Officers Miller and Dawson had acted out of prejudice, ignoring clear evidence of Nathan's identity and targeting him solely because of his race. Witnesses took the stand, recounting how they had seen the arrest unfold. One bystander described the officers' aggressive behavior, saying it seemed excessive given the circumstances. Another spoke about the fear they felt as they watched the incident, realizing how quickly things could escalate when someone was perceived as different. Rachel presented video footage captured by witnesses, highlighting moments where Nathan remained calm and cooperative despite the hostility directed at him. She pointed out inconsistencies in the officer's initial report, questioning why they hadn't verified his identity before escalating the situation. Her arguments were sharp and methodical, designed to expose the flaws in the defense's narrative, but the defense fought back fiercely. Lawyers representing Officers Miller and Dawson insisted their clients had followed standard protocol, arguing that any reasonable officer would have acted similarly under the circumstances. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the challenges police face during traffic stops, suggesting that Nathan's demeanor may have contributed to the misunderstanding. At times, their tone bordered on dismissive, as if implying that Nathan should have expected such treatment given his profession and public profile. Throughout the trial, Nathan listened intently, his jaw clenched whenever the defense tried to paint him as uncooperative or confrontational. He wanted to speak up to set the record straight, but Rachel had warned him against letting his emotions get the better of him. "Stay composed," she reminded him during breaks. "Your testimony will be your chance to tell your side of the story." That moment came midway through the trial. When Nathan was called to the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing, their attention fixed on him as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. As he recounted the events of that fateful night, his voice remained steady, though the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. "I've spent my life working within the justice system," he began, looking directly at the jury. "I know what it means to uphold the law, to treat everyone fairly regardless of who they are. That's why what happened to me was so shocking. I wasn't just disrespected. I was dehumanized. And not because of anything I did, but because of the color of my skin." His testimony struck a chord with many in the room. Some jurors nodded thoughtfully, while others scribbled notes furiously. Outside the courthouse, snippets of his speech aired on live television, prompting emotional reactions from viewers across the country. Social media lit up once again, with hashtags like "Listen to Nathan" trending alongside messages of support. Despite the power of his words, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the odds were stacked against him. The defense worked tirelessly to undermine his credibility, cross-examining him about minor details and twisting his responses to fit their narrative. They questioned whether he had truly cooperated fully, implying that even slight hesitation could justify the officer's actions. It was frustrating, but Nathan refused to let them rattle him. He answered each question calmly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. Back home, Angela and Marcus struggled to cope with the stress of the trial. Every day felt like a roller coaster, with emotions swinging wildly, depending on how the courtroom drama unfolded. Angela tried to stay strong for her family, but there were moments when she broke down in private, overwhelmed by anger and helplessness. Marcus, meanwhile, channeled his frustration into action. Inspired by his father's courage, he joined local youth groups organizing protests and educational workshops. Together with friends like Emily Taylor and Jamal Carter, he helped spread awareness about systemic racism and police brutality. One evening, after another grueling day in court, Nathan returned home to find Marcus waiting for him in the living room. "Dad," Marcus said hesitantly, "can we talk?" Nathan nodded, sitting down beside his son. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated before speaking. "I don't want you to give up, okay? No matter what happens in that courtroom, you've already made a difference. People are listening now. They're talking about things they never used to think about." Nathan smiled faintly, touched by his son's words. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot." "But promise me something," Marcus added, his voice firmer this time. "Promise me you won't stop fighting, even if it doesn't go our way." Nathan reached over and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I promise," he said softly. "We'll keep going, no matter what." As the trial entered its final stages, tensions reached a boiling point. Closing arguments became heated exchanges, with both sides pulling out all the stops to sway the jury. The prosecution emphasized the need for accountability, urging the jurors to send a message that racial profiling would not be tolerated. The defense countered by framing the officers as scapegoats caught in a larger political battle, imploring the jury to focus on facts rather than emotions. When the judge finally instructed the jury to deliberate, the courtroom erupted into murmurs of anticipation. Nathan sat silently, gripping Angela's hand tightly. There was nothing left to do now but wait and hope. Days passed agonizingly slowly as the jury debated behind closed doors. Each knock on the door or sudden movement sent hearts racing, only for disappointment to follow when it turned out to be nothing. Outside, protests continued, with supporters chanting slogans and holding vigils in solidarity. The nation held its breath, aware that the verdict would carry far-reaching implications. Finally, on the fifth day of deliberation, the jury reached a decision. The courtroom reconvened, packed to capacity with spectators and reporters. As the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, Nathan braced himself for whatever came next. Whatever the outcome, he knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting for the words that would shape not only Nathan's future, but also the hopes and fears of countless others. She cleared her throat, glanced down at the paper in her hands, and spoke clearly. "We find the defendants, Officers Greg Miller and Laura Dawson, not guilty." For a moment, no one reacted. It was as if time had frozen, leaving everyone suspended in disbelief. Then slowly, murmurs rippled through the gallery. On one side, supporters of the officers erupted into cheers, clapping and hugging each other. On the other side, Nathan's allies sat stunned, their faces pale with shock. A few began crying softly, while others clenched their fists in anger. Nathan himself felt numb. He stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Angela reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. Rachel Monroe leaned over, whispering urgently, "We can appeal. This isn't the end." But Nathan barely heard her. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. How could this be? After all the evidence, after everything he'd endured, the system still failed him. Outside the courthouse, news of the verdict spread like wildfire. Protesters who had gathered earlier in anticipation now surged forward, their disappointment turning into rage. Chants of "no justice, no peace" echoed through the streets as the crowd swelled. Someone threw a rock, shattering a window nearby. Others lit fires in trash bins, sending plumes of black smoke spiraling into the night sky. Riot police moved in quickly, forming a line to block the advancing crowd. The tension between the two sides crackled like electricity, ready to explode at any moment. Inside the courthouse, Nathan tried to maintain his composure. He knew losing control wouldn't help anyone. As the judge dismissed the court, reporters rushed toward him, shouting questions. Flashbulbs popped wildly, blinding him momentarily. Angela pulled him close, shielding him from the chaos as they made their way outside. Marcus waited for them near the steps, his face red with frustration. "They got away with it," he muttered bitterly. "How is this even possible?" "It's not fair," Angela agreed, tears streaming down her face. "But we're not giving up. We'll keep fighting for you, Dad, and for everyone else out there." Nathan nodded, though deep down he felt defeated. For years he had believed in the justice system, trusted that it could be a force for good. Now, he wondered if that belief had been naive. If someone like him, a chief justice, a public figure, couldn't get justice, what hope was there for ordinary citizens? Back home, the family struggled to come to terms with the verdict. Angela spent hours on the phone, reaching out to activists and organizers to plan their next steps. Marcus threw himself into organizing protests, determined to channel his anger into action. Friends and supporters flooded their house, offering comfort and solidarity. But Nathan withdrew, spending most of his time alone in his study. He replayed the trial in his mind over and over, searching for something he might have done differently. Could he have answered the defense's questions better? Should he have pushed harder during his testimony? Each question gnawed at him, leaving him feeling powerless. Meanwhile, the protests grew larger and more intense. Cities across the country erupted in demonstrations, with thousands taking to the streets to demand accountability. Buildings were vandalized, cars set ablaze, and clashes broke out between protesters and police. Social media buzzed with videos and photos capturing the chaos, fueling debates about the role of law enforcement and systemic racism. Politicians scrambled to respond, some calling for calm while others used the unrest to push their agendas. It seemed like the entire nation was divided, unable to agree on anything except that change was needed. Officers Miller and Dawson returned to work shortly after the verdict, emboldened by the outcome. They resumed their duties without apology, acting as if nothing had changed. Their behavior became increasingly reckless, leading to more incidents of misconduct. Complaints poured into the police department, but little was done to address them. To many, it felt like the system wasn't just broken, it was rigged. Despite the overwhelming sense of defeat, Nathan eventually emerged from his self-imposed isolation. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, he received a letter. It was handwritten, the envelope bearing no return address. Curious, he opened it and began reading. "Dear Chief Justice Harris, I know saying sorry won't fix what happened to you, but I want you to know I regret my actions that night. I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment, and because of that, I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I've thought a lot about what I did, and I realize now how wrong I was. I hope one day you can forgive me. Sincerely, Laura Dawson." Nathan stared at the letter, unsure how to feel. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as insincere, an attempt to ease her conscience without facing real consequences. But another part of him recognized the courage it must have taken for her to write it. Forgiveness wasn't easy, especially when the wounds were still fresh. Yet he couldn't deny the significance of her acknowledgement. Maybe redemption was possible, even in a world filled with so much pain. Inspired by the letter and motivated by his son's determination, Nathan decided to rejoin the fight. He started speaking publicly again, using his platform to amplify marginalized voices and push for meaningful reform. At rallies and town halls, he shared his story, urging people not to lose hope. Change doesn't happen overnight, he told the crowds, but every step forward matters. Together, we can build a better future. His words resonated deeply, reigniting the movement's momentum. Activists redoubled their efforts, organizing marches and petitions. Schools incorporated discussions about racial bias into their curriculums, and lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. While progress was slow, small victories gave hope to those still fighting for justice. As months passed, Nathan found solace in knowing that his experience hadn't been in vain. Though the verdict stung, it had sparked a national conversation about inequality and accountability. People who once ignored these issues were now paying attention, demanding answers and solutions. Even Marcus noticed a shift among his peers who seemed more aware and engaged than ever before. One evening, as Nathan stood alongside Marcus at a rally, surrounded by thousands of voices united in their call for justice, he allowed himself to believe that true change was possible. The road ahead remained long and fraught with challenges, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since the arrest, he truly believed that persistence and unity could overcome even the deepest injustices. And so, the fight continued, not just for Nathan, but for everyone who deserved to live in a world where fairness and equality weren't just ideals, but realities. Months had passed since the trial, but its impact lingered. For Nathan Harris, life had changed in ways he never imagined. Once a respected judge who worked quietly behind the scenes, he was now a public figure leading the charge for justice. His face appeared on magazine covers, his name trended online, and his speeches inspired thousands. Yet, despite the newfound attention, Nathan remained grounded. He knew this movement wasn't about him. It was about creating a world where no one else would face the same injustice he endured. Every day brought new challenges. Politicians debated reforms, activists organized protests, and communities came together to demand accountability. Progress was slow, often frustratingly so. But small victories gave hope. In some cities, police departments began requiring officers to wear body cameras. Schools introduced programs teaching students about systemic racism and empathy. Lawmakers proposed bills aimed at addressing racial bias in law enforcement. These steps were far from perfect, but they showed that change was possible, even if it took time. Nathan threw himself into the work, traveling across the country to speak at rallies, town halls, and conferences. At each event, he shared his story, not just as a victim of prejudice, but as someone committed to building a better future. "What happened to me wasn't unique," he often said. "It happens every day to countless individuals who don't have the privilege of being heard. That's why we must keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." His words resonated deeply, especially with young people. Marcus, now more involved than ever, became a key figure in the youth-led movement pushing for reform. Alongside friends like Emily Taylor and Jamal Carter, he helped organize marches, workshops, and social media campaigns. Together, they educated their peers about the importance of standing up against injustice. Their energy was infectious, inspiring older generations to join the cause. At home, Angela supported Nathan and Marcus tirelessly. She coordinated logistics for events, managed outreach efforts, and kept the family grounded during tough times. Though she worried about the risks they faced, threats still arrived regularly via email and phone calls. She refused to let fear dictate their lives. Instead, she focused on the positive changes happening around them. "We're making a difference," she reminded Nathan whenever doubts crept in. "Even if it doesn't feel like it right now, we are." The movement also gained allies in unexpected places. One day, Nathan received a call from Laura Dawson, the officer who had written him the apology letter. She asked to meet in person, hoping to discuss how she could contribute to the cause. Though hesitant at first, Nathan agreed. They met at a quiet cafe, sitting across from each other awkwardly at first. "I know I can't undo what happened," Laura began, her voice trembling slightly. But I want to help make things right. If there's anything I can do, Nathan interrupted gently. You've already taken the first step by acknowledging your mistakes. Now, use your position to advocate for change within the department. Speak up when you see wrongdoing. Educate others. That's how you'll truly make a difference. Laura nodded, visibly moved. From then on, she began attending meetings with advocacy groups, sharing her perspective as a former officer. Her involvement sparked mixed reactions. Some praised her courage, while others accused her of seeking redemption too late. But Nathan believed everyone deserved a chance to grow, including those who had once caused harm. As the months turned into a year, the movement gained even more momentum. National leaders began taking notice, introducing sweeping legislation aimed at reforming policing practices. Training programs emphasized de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Independent oversight boards were established to review cases of misconduct. While critics argued these measures didn't go far enough, supporters celebrated them as important steps forward. In the midst of all this, Nathan found moments of peace. He cherished evenings spent with Angela and Marcus, reflecting on how far they'd come. They laughed over dinner, shared stories about their day, and dreamed about what the future might hold. These simple joys reminded him why he fought so hard, to create a world where families like theirs could live without fear. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Nathan stood on a stage at a massive rally. Thousands of people filled the Tao Park, their faces glowing in the golden light. Signs waved in the air, voices chanted in unison, and hope hung thick in the atmosphere. As he looked out at the crowd, Nathan felt a surge of gratitude for their resilience, their determination, and their unwavering belief in a brighter tomorrow. "Thank you," he began, his voice strong and steady. "Thank you for standing here today, for refusing to give up when the odds seemed impossible. This fight isn't easy and it won't end overnight, but together, we're proving that persistence and unity can overcome even the deepest injustices." The crowd erupted in cheers, their applause echoing through the park. Nathan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe, not just in the possibility of change, but in its inevitability. After the rally, Nathan joined Angela and Marcus backstage. They hugged tightly, savoring the moment. "We did good tonight," Marcus said proudly, "but there's still more to do." "You're right," Nathan replied, ruffling his son's hair, "and we'll keep going no matter what." As they walked back to their car, hand in hand, Nathan glanced up at the darkening sky. Stars began to twinkle faintly, reminding him of the countless individuals who had fought for justice before him and those who would continue the battle after him. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: as long as people refused to stay silent, true justice would prevail. And so, the journey continued, not just for Nathan, but for everyone dreaming of a fairer, kinder world.